And so Kara has done a fantastic job connecting with each one of the patients, connecting with the critical access hospitals, as well as the clinics. And so I will turn this over to Kara so that she can give us the nuts and bolts of the program.
Thank you, Amanda. I feel so formal with the microphone. Love it. So I think we've got roughly an hour together. And so we'll just jump right in. I've kind of structured things into 3 different pieces. First, just wanting to make sure that we all have the same kind of common understanding of remote patient monitoring using some similar vocab. And then from there, we'll jump in and talk why Higgy Care Every Day, the RPM service, is a bit different than other remote patient monitoring programs. And then finally, we will talk about the pilot itself. So how it worked, exciting outcomes we're starting to see. I saw Allie is on the line from Helen Newberry Joy Hospital, their population health manager, who has been a delight to work with. And she's going to say a few words just to give you a little more of a perspective directly from one of the pilot organizations. Amanda knows me well, love to chat. So at any point, interrupt me, talk over me. I will not be offended. I don't know if anybody's watching questions online, but just flag me down. Would love to engage. Also, I'm mortified. Look at that picture of me right there. I am wearing the same headband and under that jean jacket, I am wearing this dress. I assure you, I have more than one outfit. I really need to think about that next time. Okay, cool. You good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, awesome. And do you want to stand next to me the whole time? You can.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna say much, but
Okay. Oh my gosh, I love this. Okay, anytime, tap me out. Okay, so as Amanda shared, my name is Kara Massa. So excited to be here. I'm a very proud member of the Higgy team as well as the broader Motive Care family. Motive Care is quite a large organization and provides integrative supportive care services, which enable access to care for patients while also really addressing health-related social needs. So a robust array of services that come along with that. And one thing that all parts of our business have in common, the patient is always at the center of everything we do. I know that resonates very close to home for Allie. I know Helen Newberry Joy, their mission statement is really focused on the patients. It probably resonates with so many of you in the room. Before I jump into talking more just specifically.
I'm just gonna mute this mic.
Okay.
See if that'll work and doesn't mess anything up.
Perfect. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is that better? Any better?
Yep, keep
Okay,
going.
okay, cool. So a very large chunk of what we do at Motive Care focuses on the supportive care needs of Medicare and Medicaid members across the US. A very large chunk of our business is focused on non-emergency medical transport. In addition to that, we've got personal care, digital engagement, and of course, monitoring services. And today we're going to talk about our highest touch remote patient monitoring service, which is called Higgy Care Every Day. I guess I need to remember to advance the. Sure, that sounds great. Okay, so what is remote patient monitoring? Well, at its core, it really is a form of telehealth, sometimes called.
In a van.
In a van by the river?
Yes, no, like, don't repeat this, I'm not talking, but he now like makes out. I was like, damn, I was like. When they answer get bored here.
used to that are used. Remix.
So this is a new piece of equipment.
It was chirping earlier. I mean, we are in new territory. Should I just start the video right here? And we could unmute this one so they could see and hear through this?
I think we do that. Yes, troubleshoot. Sure, yes.
So I think we'll just start this video. Probably a great double chin for everybody online. I should have taped up here. Okay, does that work? Basically, at its core, RPM, okay, great. Non-face-to-face monitoring and analysis of physiological factors used to understand a patient's health issues, status in more of a proactive way, as opposed to reactionary. Biometric data that can be collected includes things like blood pressure, blood glucose, body weight, heart rate, oxygen saturation are all things that can be captured through remote patient monitoring. That's okay, I like this one, you got it. Yeah, perfect. Okay, thanks. Okay, and remote patient monitoring, it's not its first time around the block here. For 2+ decades, people have been studying remote patient monitoring, and it continues to evolve. You can see here, not only do the use cases continue to evolve, but of course the technology continues to evolve, acceptance continues to evolve. COVID really accelerated, like it did with so many forms of telehealth, the use of remote patient monitoring. So since 2020, there's been a bit of an explosion in the market with remote patient monitoring. As you can see on the bottom of the screen here, studies continue to demonstrate the clinical benefits of RPM, and just as the body of evidence supporting all the clinical benefits of remote patient monitoring continues to grow, so too do the various use cases that you can use remote patient monitoring for. When we talk about benefits of RPM, I've just highlighted a few here for you. It's an extremely powerful tool, and if done right, can really aid organizations in their quest to achieve the quadruple aim. Here on the screen, a few of the common benefits, and above and beyond some of these major benefits, such as cost avoidance for not only the patient, but also the healthcare organization. Additional benefits can include increased medication adherence with our patients, improved quality measures and gap closures, more meaningful provider to patient encounters due to that extra layer of data and insight that the provider has into the life of their patient. The ability to leverage the data to uncover better population health insights, also a big one. And then, of course, improved operational efficiencies for providers and practices, just to name a few. So along with those benefits, when we're talking specifically about rule settings, some of these benefits are really amplified. Many I guess from peace of mind, really, all the way to literally removing barriers of having to have patients have transportation to and from the doctor. Remote patient monitoring can be a game changer for many who live in rural parts of the country. And just as the potential benefits of RPM can be amplified in rural settings, so can the barriers. Last night, as I was just kind of doing a quick review of the deck, for some reason, I could not get the theme song of The Facts of Life out of my head. And this morning, driving here, it was like 2 hours of like, yeah, the bed, yeah, the bed, you know, I was doing the whole thing. And then I got to thinking, I was like, that's not even my drug of choice. Like, I was a Full House, Michelle Tanner type of gal. Facts of Life, I don't know why, but anyway, I did a little singing already. My husband will call me when he's like, you were had a microphone. Okay, anyway, I digress. Focusing back on the potential barriers in rural settings. We do have some things that definitely can be amplified, and we have experienced them firsthand with our pilot. Connectivity, meaning device connectivity, is obviously a critical component of device readings and being able to get those in near real time. So that can be hard when you're, outside of urban areas. Staffing and resources, I think that's something we always think about. That can be a barrier. When working with rural populations, and specifically our beloved seniors, there's not only that technology literacy piece, but also the technology acceptance piece can be something that you're kind of working against. Trust is an interesting one. Often trust in rural communities, is something that is so valuable, something that has been fostered and grown out of love for not only years, but generations. So when you introduce something new, whether it has new people or whatnot, new can be scary, new can be hard, change can be hard. So that's definitely something that can feel a bit heavier in rural spaces. Anything else I want to kind of hit? Maybe the final barrier that I'd just like to call out is the thought that remote patient monitoring is really in competition with chronic care management, which is not the case at all. They can complement each other so nicely, and we can all play in the sandbox together. And I think what you'll see from our pilot is the spaces where robust CCM programs, it at first was like, oh, maybe we're going to step on each other's toes. I think, people were worried about that. And in fact, it has been quite the opposite. We have really, as a remote patient monitoring partner, been able to give more space to the already strapped CCM teams to reach more lives, help more people, take a load off of their plate. So that's something I think that our team is extremely proud of. One last thing I'll just highlight here in barriers in rural settings. This was just a article that actually came out end of last year, but then was highlighted in the American Journal of Hypertension here in February. And it basically, data continues to show that although COVID did a lot for expanding telehealth services and really expediting the utilization of such services, specifically when focused on rural settings, the data demonstrated that rural residents were less likely to use telehealth for hypertension management. So I wouldn't say that's shocking by any means, but it's just something that continues to pop its head up. And so something that we need to be very cognizant of as we're trying to make a difference in this space. And we've been living and breathing this in three rural amazing. I think I might be moving to the Upper Peninsula. I don't know when, but I've let my husband know, like, pack your bags, because at some point we're headed north. I've just fallen in love, not only with the area, but the folks up north. We've been able to kind of get around this by pulling different various levers, and we'll talk more about that, to kind of combat this data and what we're seeing out in the real world. So with that, I'm going to talk about one less barrier for RPM today, which is an exciting one. Prior to the start of this year, rural health clinics and FQHCs were not able to bill for RPM services. So if RHC or FQHC wanted to bring RPM, they would have to partner with a friend like Higgy, who could bill for the services, or they could do it on their own, but not collect on that. So that's a hard proposition, especially we know in our healthcare landscape, just not something that's really doable for a lot of people. So I like to think with this one, ding dong, the witch is dead. People are free to do as they please when it comes to remote patient monitoring now. And our rural friends aren't limited in this capacity anymore as of the beginning of this year. One last slide before I'll take a minute to pause and see if there's any questions. But when we look at industry trends, what's going on right now in the world of RPM, it's not going anywhere. We know innovation is going to continue to happen. We see use cases evolve. So not only does the technology evolve, the use cases evolve. The more and more the industry shifts away from fee for service and embraces value-based care, the greater the demand for RPM services and additional digital engagement tools such as RPM, the demand will grow. So that's kind of what we're seeing out there in the real world. But before we move on to the second portion of our 3-portion journey today, do we have any questions or comments? Sounds good. So let's talk a little bit, before we talk about the pilots specifically, we'll talk a little bit about Higgy Care Every Day, the remote patient monitoring solution that we deployed at these 3 rural independent hospitals. And just a few things that I think are helpful to understand this RPM solution is that, well, of course, it is technology enabled, like that's the bare bones of RPM, you have to have the technology. This solution is really relationship driven. It's driven by the relationships we establish with patients, with their primary care teams, and also that trust that we've talked about before. We work so hard day in and day out to really try to build and maintain those relationships to drive healthy outcomes for our patients, reduce the cost of care. Our Higgy clinicians have the goal of improving patient health through proactive identification and response to health concerns before they get out of hand. Our goal is to keep patients happy and healthy from home. Anything we can do to help connect the dots and fill in those gaps for providers and patients, the better. We have on our team dedicated registered nurse care managers, and those are really the main touch points that patients have with our team. So we say dedicated because we connect patients really with one care manager. Of course, you know, Tasha might have to go out on vacation or get sick or whatnot like that. But overall, our care managers really build deep, meaningful relationships with these patients. And as we'll talk about in the pilot, just that alone has additional impacts beyond helping with their blood pressure. We're helping with that isolation piece, especially in the winter. We've been able to identify where there are social needs, helping to find local meal programs or what, just helping get those patients what they need when they need it. One thing I want to call out is our program is extremely mindful of the way it was built is extremely mindful of all that clinicians have on their plate today. I bet if you were to talk to a provider and say, hey, I've got another great point solution for you, you're going to love it. Right away, they might say, yeah, no, okay, have you seen what I have to do? And so we really wanted to make sure that we deliver this service in a way in which serves not only the patient, but also lessens the clinical burden of the providers we're partnering with. That's of the utmost importance to us. And poor Amanda, she's probably heard me say this so many times and thinks I have it tattooed on my body at this point. But I love to share with folks that not all RPM solutions are created equal. You can have, and not that that's bad, different people need different things, but I want to call out the solution that we deployed, this Higgy Care Every Day, is really kind of the highest touch RPM program that our company offers. But I don't think you'll find too many like it that are that high of touch. And they're, I always say, technology enabled, relationship driven, because that's really at the core of who we are. Okay, so a bit more here. Just wanted to give you a high level overview of kind of how our specific solution works. High level overview. So first and foremost, patients need to be identified. Through the pilot, we did that in different ways, and we'll show you how that impacted our outcomes. So we can either do a referral from a provider, or we can have an eligibility file that gets worked of patients who have been determined to be in need of remote patient monitoring. So we at Hickey Care Every Day, we do that identification in conjunction with our partner. And then once that patient has been identified, whether it be a referral from a PCP or through that eligibility file, really the heavy lifting comes over to Hickey. We do that outreach to the patient. We talk to them, educate them on the entire program. One piece of the puzzle to get them enrolled is we need to do an initial telehealth appointment. We have to do that for two reasons. One, to make sure that the medical necessity is there and that it's clearly documented. Also, it gives our provider team a chance to get to know the patient a bit better so we can make sure that we're tailoring the program for them. But then also we need to know which devices are appropriate for that patient. So that's usually about a quick 15-minute to 30-minute appointment. It can get down to business, but again, we work with so many amazing seniors that sometimes they go a little bit longer just because it's a fantastic interaction and folks are excited to chit chat. But from there, then once we know thumbs up, you're good, this is gonna hopefully be a great thing for you, we'll go ahead, we ship out those devices to the patient. As soon as they receive those devices, and we'll talk about the easy to use devices here in a moment, pop in the batteries and they can get going with their devices. We do at that point have their dedicated nurse care manager jumps in, gives them a call. If they haven't seen a reading come through and they know the device was delivered, they are happy to do the white glove. Okay, we are going to open up your blood pressure cuff here together. Oh, you see those 2 AA batteries in there? Okay, we're gonna pop those out. Yeah, we can get down as slow as we need to help these patients feel comfortable and get going. And then from there, we have at least a monthly touch base between the dedicated nurse care manager and the patient. It can be more often than that. Some of our patients love to text, some prefer just phone calls, but the patient is really in the driver's seat and we don't want to overwhelm them, but at the same time, we want to make sure to be there, help where we can to really help that behavior modification piece, the education. There can be, depending on what the patient needs, some adjustment there. And last but certainly not least is we in no way, shape or form claim to replace their primary care provider. That is not the game we're in. We are there to amplify and augment the care that they're receiving from their PCP. So keeping a direct line of communication open with a patient's provider is of the utmost importance to us. What we do is, and I use the collective we, I am not a clinician, I know it's shocking, but our team, pours over that data, makes sure to clinically validate things. We're making sure that a grandson isn't jumping up and down on the scale because we got some wackadoodle reading, digging in. And then we like to raise the red flag to a PCP when we see a reading of concern and we've validated it with the patient. We do not do anything with their medications. We just get the appropriate information and the context to that primary care provider so that they can then work with their patient on the appropriate next best course of action. So escalations, we'll highlight that here in a minute. And then in addition to escalations, we do monthly patient-specific summary reports that go to the provider as well. So I've already covered on some of this about, augment and amplify what a PCP does. We are just there. A lot of people think of us as their RPM department. And that's kind of the goal. We like to kind of fade into the background and be part of that team and are there to help connect the dots and just really let the provider do what they do best by giving them that additional layer of insight. Patient escalations, you'll note here on the bottom, we in no way, shape or form like to approach an organization and say, this is the way it's gonna be done or hit the road, Jack. Like, no, we wanna know, how do your workflows work? What's the best way, the most efficient way for us to communicate and make sure that the course of action works for everybody. In some places, we work so closely with the care management team. I think when Allie talks, like her care coordinators are an unbelievable powerhouse woman team. I'm just obsessed with them. We pick up the phone, call the care managers, will say, hey, Bonnie, so-and-so this is what's going on, give them all the data so that they can then work with a Dr. Shepherd or whomever it may be, to get Joe Schmo back on track. In addition to that, and I know this is like teeny tiny, so I think you're gonna see the slides later. I just wanted to iterate here that there are those monthly patient reports. You like to do different trends so that it's a quick visual for the provider. Also some different notes that might provide additional new information that we're tracking in the background with that patient. But those go through to the providers so that they know what's up. Okay, I'm gonna pause. That is through the second portion of our journey. Jill.
Yes, we do have questions online.
Okay.
Is there any IT support to assist with connecting, and my little pop-up box just disappeared, with connecting the devices to Wi-Fi once delivered to the home?
Whoever
seems to struggle with this stuff.
Whoever that is, I'm obsessed with them. Because we'll talk about the devices that we deploy. One of the biggest pieces that's a little bit different about Higgy again is we use cellularly enabled devices. There's no need for Wi-Fi connection, no internet, no Bluetooth. And I'll share with you guys a blood pressure cuff that I brought in, or that it might be in my car, but I will get it. All they have to do is open the box, they pop out the batteries, put them in, whether it be their glucometer or whatnot. They hit the start button, it takes their reading, it connects. It takes less than like I want to say like a 30th of the bandwidth that a text message takes to get that reading up to a cell tower to then get over to us. Now, of course, that does not go without some complications. We have one gentleman on the banks of Lake Huron, and I swear to you, I think he was out in the middle of Lake Huron because we just struggled and deployed a different solution for him. But that easy to use, like they don't even have to think about it or log in and upload something. You hit start and it goes. So yes, do we have the resources? Yes, the care managers are our first line of defense. They are so comfortable with these devices and know a lot of the tips and tricks. If that's not working, we'll take it up to the next level and work with our device provider and then circle back with the patient. One of the things a lot of our patients love is, I'm sorry, I don't mean that to sound like sales pitchy. I just get so pumped up and fired up about it, is they like to sometimes just call our main line to say, hey. And usually they do it with our patient engagement team, which works a little bit better for us than with the clinicians themselves. But if they've got a question, a billing question or whatnot, they call our line, and next thing you know, I'm crying on the phone with them. Just so many great patient stories. But yes, we have that IT support. Even with that initial telehealth appointment, I'd say that's really a much bigger barrier for us as opposed to the actual devices themselves. And when we jump in here to this final portion, we'll talk about how we've been able to pull some of those levers I referred to earlier to work through those barriers.
Awesome. And one additional question, and maybe you have it in a slide already. How does billing work and what is the cost of the clinic?
Great question. So this has been a pilot and we've been able to deploy it free of charge to the clinics themselves. We have been working through some different business models, and the thing about RPM is you need the size and scale. It takes a lot of investment in resources to get an RPM program up and running. You think about the software, you think about the clinicians, all of those items. So for the pilot, there was no charge. Our organization is able to bill for these services. But when you also do a double click, and I won't bore you with all the details regarding the CPT codes, but just because you're doing RPM does not mean you're guaranteed to get paid. There has to be a certain level of patient engagement. You can do everything right on your side and you might come up 30 seconds short or one reading short and you're not going to get paid for that work. So currently, and we're in talks with some of our pilot organizations about how to sustain it. We continue to do everything on our side of the house to make it something that is feasible for these organizations, for you all, because it's desperately needed. And so trying to do our best to make it as low of an entrance barrier as possible. The way we do that is by starting to then enroll with the top payers that different organizations work with, so that we can reach the largest population possible, and then hopefully be bringing in that revenue.
Does Higgy bill or the clinic?
So Higgy bills, we do actually have one other model that is where the partner organization could then charge for the RPM services. However, upon a lot of back and forth, given the scale and size you need to make that really worth your time, it's just not there for a lot of the smaller rural clinics. So billing has really been owned by the Higgy team. And then with like a small administration fee, possibly, depending on the scenario, numbers of patients and whatnot, for the clinic to participate.
So Higgy pays the clinic or the clinic pays Higgy?
The clinic would pay Higgy. However, I'm very like reluctant to say that because we continue to find ways to make this work for different partners, whether it be working directly with payers. Like, we're very creative. One thing I heard when I joined Higgy is like, we have a lot of friends, and we are so mission driven that we have no problem setting things up differently to be able to bring access to patients. So I think with Helen Newberry Joy specifically and Mackenzie, we're kind of working through those next steps of how we can sustain the program, and doing it in a way that delivers the value it needs to deliver to be something that's worthwhile for your organizations to deploy.
Yeah, I think one thing that has to be considered is the staff time it takes for us to run reports, screening patients. The care manager we're paying to do all of that is not, they're a
Yeah.
higher paid employee. So it's time from the clinic still, I guess, is.
Yeah, and one thing we'll talk about here as we get into the pilot, it does take a bit of time up front. And that's a important lesson is, well, I guess not even a lesson, but an important takeaway, is we always spend a good chunk of time with partner organizations up front to make sure that the workflows are going to work for you and that they're working for us, because obviously we can't do things 4,900 different ways for each client. It never would work. But at the same time, we're very cognizant of taking that time up front because then it pays off in dividends down the road. And I think once everybody's educated on how the program works, it really can be as simple as referring a patient to RPM, like a provider would refer someone to physical therapy. It's really sending over the referral. We take it from there. And then kind of to your point about the reports and whatnot, we raise that red flag via the escalation if there is something that your team should probably take a look at in pretty quick succession. Otherwise, we've got those reports coming through that providers love to check before they might have their annual wellness visit or whatnot, just to see, hey, how are they doing in between that year when I'm not seeing them.
I just wanted to build off of that.
Yeah, come on up.
So, no, sorry.
Nobody
Sorry.
wants me up front.
No, it's okay. So as Kara was saying, you've got that build up right up at the front. And I will tell you, our pilot organizations took 90 days from the start of the agreement to join the pilot to their first patient. And not everybody did it in 90 days. So there's a big build up. And that's what Kara was saying, like, it's a big ramp up. It's not just a flip of a switch. It's really digging in and working and having work plans. And Kara's work plans are amazing. And she have it all mapped out. And then we get on phone calls and then we're moving things around. That doesn't work. Well, then what about this? And how about that? And what about this? So there is a very, very large ramp up, and it takes a long time. But I think when you look at what she has to present with like our patient results, it's really in the long run, it's worth that 90-day ramp up of working with somebody and seeing no revenue cycle coming back to you in those first 90 days. But doing it alone, I would say it's going to take you longer than 90 days to flip the switch. If you don't partner, it's going to take a lot longer to set it up.
I
and
mean,
get
they
it
couldn't even afford the equipment. we were to do it on our own, we just wouldn't do it. I mean, those are
Right.
two options.
Right, no, totally understand that, but yeah, it is, it's surprising at how much of a ramp up that there really is to get your first patient on board and in the program. And I think really too is these readings aren't meant to cause you any extra stress or any extra stress to the clinic or the providers. It's really, once you start getting those patients, it's, you're kind of on cruise control until you get your reports in the month, or you have some abnormal readings, or something goes a little sideways. So I think really, maybe you have a lot in the beginning that you're trying to get used to, but I think we've heard from one site where it's like, there's so much to do, and it's like, but you don't have to do that much. I mean, you can, absolutely, but you don't have to. You kind of can be on cruise control and review the monthly reports and put in as much as you want into it, but you don't necessarily have to, because the reports are coming and you see the differences and things like that. So, and the escalation reports. So I think, you know, you get out of it what you put into it, I think is what the simplest answer would be.
Do the reports come like into a software that somebody retrieves the reports, or?
Great question. So for the pilot, we did not do any data integrations. Most of it was handled via eFax, where we would just eFax it over to the provider. The sites where we were looking on, you know, continuing this beautiful relationship together, we are looking at, okay, could we do a small little data integration here so that all the reports, monthly reports, just drops quietly into your EMR so that they're right there where you would expect them to be without any human interaction. And that's really where we suggest we go with organizations who have found value in it, saying, okay, yep, we do want to go forth, but for the pilot, you know, that takes a bit of money, and we just didn't want to put that pressure on anyone. So we've been doing things a bit more manually, but I think you'll see from the and I'm like stringing you guys along. Once you see these outcomes, but once you see the outcomes, you'll kind of start to see like, okay, this makes sense. And this is something we want to continue to offer to our patients. So
One
one more question. Okay.
Yep. And this one, for those without local connectivity, yeah, hardware log entries, can the hardware log the entries and then submit the log once it connects? So
Yes.
for instance, you know, they go to town and everything.
Yes, 100% that can happen. The one caveat with that, however, is we want to make sure the patient, we're all on the same exact page of like, okay, you have to go into town for us to, you know, for the readings to get picked up, you know, figure that out with you. So that means when you take that reading, we're not seeing it instantaneously like we do in most, you know, 99.9% of the cases. So if you are all of a sudden your blood sugar is crazy high through the roof, we might not see that until you go into town. So again, one of the goals of RPM is to educate patients so they know the different factors that are, you know, causing these swings. So it would be our hope that the patient would start to understand, okay, this is crazy high because I did X, Y, and Z. However, we just want to make sure if we're in that situation, they start to recognize when something could be potentially a little bit dangerous, because we don't want to wait until Tuesday when they go to get their bread. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about the pilot itself. As Amanda said, it has been 18 glorious months. This all actually happened, it came together, the first initial John Barnes approaching Haiti happened. I was on maternity leave. I came back and they're like, we're doing this thing. It's going to be amazing. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? Okay. Quickly got to know the players and thought, yeah, this is going to be amazing. The Michigan Health Endowment Fund granted Michigan Center for Rural Health some money to bring this to 3 rural pilot organizations. We were connected through a mutual friend at Michigan State University. We've done a lot of work with MSU Healthcare specifically. So that's how we were able to come together and find out that, hey, we really like one another. So 18-month pilot, we focused on senior citizens who had Medicare Part B as their primary insurance, and they needed to have been diagnosed with either hypertension, type 2 diabetes, or congestive heart failure. That's really kind of where we focused in for a patient population. Our goals here, I won't read them to you, but of course we want to help better everyone's clinical outcomes. We don't want to be a burden to providers, quite the contrary. We want to make things easier for them. And then in the background, we've been busy bees documenting. We are so excited to, in the semi-near future, debut the playbook that we have put together, that it really, if you have an organization, perhaps even your own organization, and you're thinking, RPM, should we be doing this? It lays out for you, here are the roadblocks, here are the things to think about right now. Do you want to go down option A or do you want to go down option B? Hey, option B, FYI, at the third turn, you're going to get stopped dead in your tracks because of this. Start thinking about how you want to overcome that barrier, or best practices. So we'll hit up that again here at the end. But of course, Helen Newberry Joyce, Schoolcraft Memorial, Mackenzie House System, love. Overall pilot enrollment. So we ended up enrolling 70 patients in the pilot, and I have here 2 different conversion rates. So we had 2 organizations. We worked very closely with their providers and their care coordinators to make sure they were really educated on how the program worked. They were directly sending us referrals. So if they had, and one of the barriers I would frankly tell you is, since we were only focusing on Medicare Part B patients, we're seeing so many like MA patients who would be an amazing fit for this. But since we weren't working with their MA plan at that point in time, we just were focused on the Medicare Part B, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to build something, to start covering costs. So when we had a provider, a home provider, partner provider, or CCM send that referred patient over to us, our team, and it obviously all in collaboration with our friends either up north or in the thumb and all that, conversion rate for getting those patients enrolled was 48.7%. Now you might say 50%, oh gosh. Well, outside of this, our usual conversion rate is between 25 and 35% when you're looking at PCP referrals. So 48.7, it was like, let's throw a party. Now, we had one site where a lot of these barriers were there, did not have the resources to have, didn't have care coordinators, weren't able to spread the word. And so instead we used an eligibility file, and our patient engagement team did cold calls. Talk about building character, am I right? Calling a friend up north who's never heard of you can be a little scary, but we ended up enrolling patients. Our conversion rate was 3.7. If you break it down a bit and you look at the patients we spoke to who were actually eligible, because of course, data lags, maybe somebody who no longer has Medicare Part B. We were just north, I want to say 6 point something, 6.3. Just probably, I don't want to lie to you. Conversion rate was 6.3. So it went up slightly. But again, I think this just proves how important that relationship is with the patient's PCP. That's a trusted source to these patients. And so they take the recommendation very strongly if it's coming from their PCP. Any questions on any of this so far? Okay. Just some really high level pilot outcomes. We talked about it already, that patient engagement, medication adherence, medication adjustment, facilitation. We've had countless patients who are either goal to get off of their medications or to get them lowered, or who, I can think of one gentleman who knew he had blood pressure issues, but he had no idea the extent to which he had them, because he was okay in the morning, and then he started monitoring at night, and holy Toledo, the medication was no longer doing what it needed to do. So dialing in the appropriate medication. And again, that's the PCP. We provide them with the data so they can make the most informed decision for their patients. Enhanced coordination of care. One of our partners outside of the pilot, at one point, the patient engagement team was complaining a little bit because they kept saying, they keep calling us asking to be connected to so-and-so department. So we were so one and the same with that partner organization that they couldn't tell who was Higgy and who was their home organization. And I celebrated. I'm like, this is the most cool problem to have ever. So just that seamless care, enhanced coordination of care during that ramp up. Our team loves to learn, like, hey, what programs do you have going on in town? What, this, that? And we build up our little playbook, so we know, hey, you know, it can even think, it can even be something like a senior is lonely, they're really isolated. Oh, do you know there's that meetup in, you know, so-and-so on Tuesday morning at 8:30, like all that stuff. We really try just to round out their care in all ways. Okay, let's talk about some hot off the press numbers. So improved health outcomes. We're gonna focus here on a cohort of 42 patients who have been enrolled for 6 months, just looking at their blood pressure. Here you can see upon enrollment, there were 57, so that top bar, far right, 57% of the patients were above HEDIS control, aka they were uncontrolled with their blood pressure. After 6 months in the program, that was down to 24%. And so we saw a 78% increase in that population under HEDIS control. It's exciting. Let's look at it a little bit of a different way. So when we look at those 24 patients, so a smaller N, but again, you know, looking at our pilot here, when we look at those patients who are initially uncontrolled, average reduction in blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, average reduction, 25 millimeters of mercury. For a girl with a speech impediment with her R's, I get so nervous to say that word. Mercury. Okay, and then when we look at the average reduction in diastolic numbers for this 24 patients who started in the uncontrolled bracket, their diastolic came down an average of 11 millimeters of mercury. And then of course, when you look and you think about the 5 millimeters of mercury drop in systolic blood pressure reduces the risk of major cardiovascular events by 10%. You start thinking, whoa, baby. That's a Full House reference if anybody wanted to keep up with that. But these are some really strong and encouraging numbers. One thing I did want to comment is we also have the ability, our team has the ability to contract with organizations so that we can do a data share when it comes to this HEDIS CBP, so that can be readily available to the organizations, because of course that's important. One last trend here. Did that go? Yes, okay. One last trend when we're looking at the full 6-month patient cohort. So again, backing out a little bit, looking at those 42 patients. Of course, we saw like the crazy decreases, reductions in blood pressure when we looked at just our initially uncontrolled friends. But even when you look at the broad population, you'll see here there was still an ability to reduce blood pressures on average, systolic 11, diastolic 5. So again, still really strong numbers that gets us excited. Okay, I'm down just to 2 last slides here. You all have been so patient. If I were you, I know I'd already be annoyed with myself. So thank you. You've all been very gracious. Pilot outcomes, patient satisfaction. We have had so many kind, happy patients. We talk to them via phone to do this survey. It takes less than 4 minutes. You'll see these numbers are, I keep waiting for like the other shoe to drop. I'm like, okay, you know, making a call, this person, I bet they're not gonna like us. And then next thing you know, but just continue to get great feedback. We are very proud of serving as an extension of these organizations, and we do not take that lightly. Knowing just the quality and commitment that these organizations have to their communities. Again, that's not something we play with. So these numbers, we're incredibly proud and grateful to be able to be parts of these communities. This again, like, hey, ABC chart. These are direct quotes from patients during that call when we ask them. And we make that call, they've had to have been enrolled at least 60 days before we ask them some of these questions. But themes that you'll see here is people are much more aware of what is going on. That is kind of a ringing true theme. A lot of folks no longer have their head in the sand. We're seeing some behavior modification happen. They like that it's connected to their PCP. And that's one takeaway that on the final slide we'll call out is I cannot understate enough the importance of having the PCPs invested in the program. If their PCP says, Kara, you know, we gotta get this under control. I want you to get an RPM. Okay. I go and I get enrolled in RPM and I show up at my next appointment and I'm eager to show off my results. If my provider never even acknowledges my results and what's coming through, that's not gonna make me feel like, okay, this is actually important for my health. So again, it's that full circle encouragement along the way that's really important. And with that, if Allie is still on the line, and she just had, I believe, one slide, and Allie, feel free to just let it rip. And I won't be offended if you say anything mean about me. Not that Allie ever would, kindest person.
I definitely would not. I am a little
Okay.
jealous that I'm not
this
there.
This is her slide.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, her slide. So I think as long as we can hear her.
Yep, she should be on.
Are you able to hear me? Oh, can you hear me, Kara?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure if anyone else can. Kara, can you hear me?
Allie, I think their computer is just having an issue.
Uh-oh. I'm just going to chat it in, but yep, I can't see the screen either, so I'm not sure. I'll just hold on a little longer. Uh-oh.
Is anybody typing?
Can anyone hear me now?
I can hear you. And Marquette, at
That's
least.
okay.
I think
I'm
we
glad
can
that
hear
you can.
you
Yeah.
virtually, Allie, but it seems like in person, maybe their computer died or something.
I can't see the screen either with the slide. Oh no.
I saw a random battery is low thing pop up, so maybe it was that on their
Oh,
end.
oh no, I feel bad.
Oh, good. I thought the battery low was me.
Oh.
Me too. I think it was them.
I don't know if you guys want me to talk about it.
You should be able to hear us, and we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. If you want me to go ahead and talk about the slide, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. So what I was going to talk about, oh, is it back up or?
You'll have to mute. Okay, you should go.
Okay, so to start with, here at the Gibson Family Health Clinic and our outlying clinics in Manistee Lakes, we were offered the opportunity to start remote patient monitoring, actually through UPHB. And we were given 6 kits, I believe it was, a few years ago. There was a desktop application that we could go ahead and follow our patients with. It was rather difficult. We, of course, started off very ambitious. We had 2 care coordinators at the time who really wanted to extend the program out to our patients, but all of the monitoring of that desktop application was through the care coordinators. So you were kind of glued to your desktop that entire time. So any alerts, anything that came through, at that time we had a scale, blood pressure cuff, and I believe there was one other, I can't even remember it so many years ago, but we couldn't really keep track of everything and really give that level of care that we wanted to. And then on top of it, give the providers any of the data that they needed to really make any clinical decisions. So we were pretty scared off of starting remote patient monitoring again. It wasn't something we felt we could adequately keep track of, give our patients any adequate care, and provide our providers any data on. When Higgy reached out, we had Kara, who was wonderful, approach us with everything. She laid out such a wonderful plan, listened to us, our concerns, and just really squashed those that we did go ahead and say yes. We were able to work together as a team, get all of our concerns together, and Kara gave us all the information we needed to go ahead and make a decision that was very thoroughly planned out right from the get-go. So this is something that we were able to keep the patient at the center of everything. We were able to get the information we needed, get it to the provider without having that interface with Epic, which is our EHR that we use. And it's something that was very important to us. A lot of what we do as a rural health clinic is referral based. We're not getting that information right from our EHR. We have to make sure that we are working with other providers, other programs, and then make sure that we get it back and get it to where it needs to go. And that was a seamless effort. After a few questions, concerns, debriefings, how we're going to do this, it was something that we feel worked very well without having that interface. Working with our providers was something that was very, I want to say, easy with Kara on board. She was more than happy to help work with our providers, answer questions and concerns. So really knowing who you're going to partner with to make RPM or bring RPM to your clinic is probably the most vital aspect of this. If you have that strong team, strong partner relationship with your providers, with your clinical team, with your care managers, having that good partner that's going to bring RPM to your clinic should be the biggest decision there. Planning, like I said, it's very important. Having everything kind of playing devil's advocate while you're going to start the process, you must do, so that you know every little thing that might come up, really every little hurdle, because it will come up, and then some that you don't think of. But if you're able to really get that solidly in place before you roll it out, it's not as daunting as it could be. And then really having this toolbox or prepared so that you can read over it and see how it can implement in your clinic, I think will be a huge asset to any other clinics that are looking to start this, because we went through all the little bumps in the road, which weren't terrible, to be honest. And then presenting that so you can have that organizational buy-in, really have everybody involved, every department that you maybe wouldn't think of, your coding, billing, your med surg, your ER, your long-term care, everyone involved, so that they know what you're doing, they can direct people to you, or they at least have an idea of what the program is and offer it to community members or family members if that's the case. But really putting in that time of planning and getting ready to implement.
So that's you. How are you, sir?
That's pretty much what I had. And then we have our care coordinators up here who are really the heart and soul of the program and really making remote patient monitoring work here at Helen Newberry Joy.
Thank you. Any questions for Allie?
I have curiosity more than a question. Did they see a shift in their utilization of services? Like, did they see those patients that were improving their outcomes having to come into the clinic less?
Great question. So now that we're just ramping down and getting to our final month of the pilot, that data is what we're working with our pilot organizations to kind of pull out different utilization. Of course, all that lagging, all of that fun stuff, especially when we're dealing with Medicare. But those are some of the really important numbers that we're starting to dive into. So we'd love to see that.
Sure, because I think that that will filter into all of those organizations, their program evaluation, how their patients are utilizing their services, over-utilization, and that's really the driver is we want access to care without over access. And so I think that
Yes.
all of that can play together beautifully there.
Right there at the right time setting, hopefully. Great, thank you, Allie. Okay, we just have 2 last slides and I will get out of here and let you be. Okay, huge. I need to say thank you so much, of course, to Amanda. I feel like we're sisters now. Is there anything I should be doing up here? Oh, yes, God, yes, nobody needs to see that. Okay, so without our partners, we couldn't do this. Allie, Tiger, and Marquette, Heather and Sandusky. Again, it has been with them opening their arms to let us get to know their teams, that we can really make this work. And one thing I would share that Allie said is, you wanna it's really important to know who your partner is. I'm not saying Higgy's the partner for you, but I'm just saying it's really critical that you take the time to evaluate how they operate, especially I feel like in rural communities where everybody knows your name. Do I have a problem with theme songs? Yes. But you know, you don't want your reputation at stake, and that sounds bad, but you just want to know who you're working with and that they carry themselves in a way that you all would, and recognize the community and, you know, what's important to your community. So just want to call that out. But Allie, Tiger, Heather, obsessed. Best practices, final slide. Okay, so one thing here, the importance of local organizations, care managers from the start. I feel like you could even, if you didn't say care manager, you would say providers, you would say, you know, some of your key stakeholders, your champions in the organization, especially with those care managers from the organizations who know patients inside and out, who know how things operate. Having their voice at the table is critical and I feel like makes such a difference. Address telehealth intimidation. What I'm going to say here, it goes to the bottom, leverage underutilized services to bring the program to life. Helen Newberry-Joy was fantastic about if a patient didn't have internet at home, come on into the clinic, we'll just help log you on quickly so you can do your telehealth appointment. Mackenzie, they have the community paramedic program. If you haven't heard about it, check it out, an amazing group. They would actually, we'd work to schedule a time that a paramedic could swing by the patient's home, help them with an internet-enabled tablet so they could do the initial telehealth appointment because that's the only time the patient needs access to internet. So if we can get over that one initial hurdle, there's a lot of creative ways to do that. Is great. Easy to use devices. We had that fabulous question about internet wireless, all cellular enabled batteries. We even send you like with the glucometer, you know, your test strips, your Lancets, all that good stuff. Data integration. So it's in the long run, if you're going to scale and really grow the program, data integration, I think is helpful for everybody all the way around. PCP, verbal closing the loop with patients, kind of to that point before of like, if a patient doesn't think their PCP thinks this is important, why am I going to think it's important? So making sure to close that loop really benefits all. And with that, I will stop. Oh, no, I lied. You guys are like her poor husband, but where to go from here? Coming soon. The playbook is going to be coming hot off the presses before you know it. And I really encourage you to take a look at that, to just start to ask yourself questions if this is a journey you're even interested. But we're really excited with the support of Michigan Center for Rural Health to make that available.
Thank you very much. I do have one question. Yes. That I'm going to pose to the group. So for those of you are online, this was a grant funded program. It was a pilot out of the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. From the center's perspective, we're always looking for new grant opportunities and ways to expand things that we're doing. if we were to have another grant, if you want to put in the chat or send me a private message, if this is something that you'd be interested in partnering on, we'd love to get some feedback on this. Of course, our goal from the center is to be able to expand and make it available to what's most useful for you and your community. So if that's something that you're interested in, put it in the chat, send me a private message on chat, whatever works for you. And a huge thank you to Kara and to Amanda for bringing the presentation today. Thank you.
And if I might just say, I have my email here, but if anybody wants to just chat about RPM, as you can tell, I can get a bit passionate about it. I just want to bounce ideas off. Maybe I'll just ask Amanda to put my email in the chat, but give your girl a shout.
Thank you again, Kara and Amanda, for such an engaging presentation, and also rolling with all of the technical difficulties that we've had. Hopefully there'll be less of those for the next couple of hours. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Aaliyah Hughes. I'm a Rural Health Projects Assistant at the Michigan Center for Rural Health. I've worked at MCRH for about a little over 2 years now, previously as administrative assistant. But I've just graduated from Michigan State University, so now I'm full-time and I'm so happy to be here. And I'm just excited to dig into the rural health clinic space and seeing how I can work with you guys to help make your communities healthier. But enough about me. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Tressa. She works at the Health Service Associates, and she's the Director of Compliance and Education. She has worked at the HSA since 2015, and HSA is a trusted partner of MCRH. We've worked with them a bunch of times. You've heard from Tressa many times before, so she needs no further introduction, and we'll be going over instrument processing today.
Right, this is like a foray into all day tomorrow. Are you excited?
I appreciate, Kara, all of the information you brought. It is such an interesting topic to discuss, especially as the expansion of those codes being allowed through the RHC, as that continues to grow and those services become more and more effective for clinics. I enjoy learning about them, and I also love your name. It's my daughter's name. It's a good name. But I'm excited for today. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm excited for today. We met back in April during the attached to the Rural Health Conference and discussed medication handling. I know quite a few of you were here for that. And then today's topic is the lovely process of instrument processing. The reason we brought those two topics to the forefront of discussion is because they are the highest levels of deficiency that we're seeing in clinics outside of emergency preparedness, if you will. But the medication handling, that single dose vial being found open in the clinic, even if that's the only thing the surveyor finds, that is a condition level survey, meaning that they will have to come back to your clinic, resurvey your facility, and go through that whole rigmarole all over again. And it's a headache you don't need. So that's why we presented on that in April. But we brought this to the forefront because it is becoming more and more of a heightened discussion, even outside of the autoclave, which we will talk about that in great detail today, because it's a safety concern for patients. If we do not know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the instruments we're utilizing for any kind of a procedure at all within our clinic setting are sterile and safe for patient use, that goes beyond just a condition level deficiency and could be heightened to an immediate jeopardy type deficiency. And so that's why we wanted to bring these topics, specifically pull them out of that process of 491-6, which we'll go into great detail on tomorrow, but talk through the process specifically regarding instruments. So we're going to look at some different methods for sterile supplies, understand the infection control implications for each of those methods, and look at that spectrum of compliance and what is the easiest path towards a successful survey and successful patient services. And then we'll look at some policy language as well, and how to conduct competency in regards to who's handling your instrument processing at your facility, and ways to build in competency checking within that process. So there are a couple of processes that you can choose from. And one of the things that we do, especially with clinics that are just coming into the RHC program, when we do a policy interview, I ask them this question: how do you process instruments at your clinic? And we talk through how to develop policy to build that foundation for appropriate processes, so that when they do the physical plant walkthrough, we're able to show that they have it in writing and the staff are knowledgeable about that and are able to follow through on those processes. But we ask, what kind of instrument processing do you do? Do you have disposable only? Do you send them out for sterilization? That's very common, especially if you're attached to a hospital that handles that for you. Do you have an autoclave on site? And if so, my blood pressure starts to rise and my heart rate starts to increase, because that's almost a guaranteed deficiency. I think they said it's like a 97% chance of a deficiency at a clinic if they have an autoclave. And then I have in big bold red letters, cold sterilization. Please do not do this. If you do, you have to know every in and out of that process, know that you have the appropriate chemical, appropriate ventilation process for that chemical, appropriate PPE. It is, and then that the instruments you're using for that cold sterilization does not require a heat element. There's a lot of nuances within that just leads itself into improper practices, unsafe practices for patients, and immediate jeopardy type situations, okay? So I'm giving that statement because more and more we were hearing clinics utilizing that because the chemical process was cheaper. But when you look at the foundation you have to set from outfitting of your clinic, appropriate PPE supplies, making sure you're replacing those chemicals in the timeline required by the manufacturer's guidance, the cost of it was much more robust than they realized until they dug into the detail of what the manufacturer required. So please do not use cold sterilization. If you do, make sure you dig into the details of it. And anyway, I'm just going to move past that because I hope nobody does that. We're going to move on. So disposable instruments. So if we look at the compliance spectrum from this is going to pass survey every single time to, well, we're in a little bit of a gray area. I can't guarantee you're going to have success at survey. We're in that spectrum there. Disposable is probably the easiest path towards compliance. However, there's a cost to that because you're having to replace supplies every single time. And so you have to weigh staff knowledge, staff competency, staff understanding of processing your reusable instruments versus the cost of those disposable instruments. So those are the costs that you have to consider: the replacement of supplies, the training of staff, the time that you're implementing into that process, and then the amount you're spending on chemicals and processes and PPE that you have to have for the chemical aspect of it. So those are the costs that you have to consider. And then appropriate storage. When we look at disposable instruments, there's usually a humidity or there is a temperature assigned to that packaging system. So you want to make sure you're looking at where you're storing your supplies to be sure that it's meeting that. It's not a damp environment where you're causing that instrument that's in a sterile packaging to no longer be considered sterile. So that you're storing them in an appropriate area. And a reminder that disposable instruments, even if you get the suture kit with all of those elements in it, with the tweezers and all of those things in one kit, once that package is open, everything in there has to be disposed of. You can't keep the tweezers because you might use them later. You didn't use them on this patient, but you might use them later. It's all one kit. Once that seal is broken, they're no longer considered sterile. So you can't store them at the clinic for intended sterile purposes later down the road, okay? Full package removed after it's open, unless you reassign them, repackage them, and label them as not for sterile purposes, okay? And then most disposable instruments have an out date attached to them. They have that lovely little time capsule picture on them that have an effective date or a expiration date attached to it. So making sure that you're monitoring those during your environmental rounding processes. I'm a picture person, so here's some pictures about what sterile instruments typically come as in disposable format. So those suture removal kits, you can see that there's scissors, forceps, and sponge. Make sure, again, if you're just opening that to take the scissors out, that those other elements that are in that package are part of that sterile process and they have to be removed. They can't be stored at the clinic opened. Same with the one to the right. Now, one thing I do want to pull into notice here, the reason I included the second image is, do you see that little tiny circle with the 2 in there and the line through it? That is another indicating symbol that it is meant for single use. That's what that symbol means, not meant for more than one patient. And so just being aware of what those symbols are and being sure that you're storing items at your clinic according to manufacturer's guidance for use. So that's disposable. That's the most straightforward, simple process, if you will. Any questions on disposable instruments before we move on? Usually the biggest barrier there is cost. Or I have had a provider say they just don't like the feel of the disposable instrument in their hand. They don't want to use them. And so it can be a discussion with your provider about why you're wanting to move to disposable instruments. It could be a discussion and an outline of your costs of here's what we're having to invest in our staff education. Here's what we're having to invest in chemicals, in our supplies, all of that for the processing piece. And here's the cost that the disposable will be, but look at the process and how easy it is to maintain compliance within this and have that discussion of that offset of costs. But the biggest barrier is usually cost on why clinics don't want to use disposable instruments. And it's up to your team. Whatever process you decide on, make sure that your staff are knowledgeable about how to carry each one out in full compliance. So then we move on to sending out of instruments. And the biggest question I like to ask when I'm walking through a clinic is, who's responsible? Who's the person who's processing these instruments? Is what responsibility lays at the clinic for prepping them? And what responsibility lays at the site that is processing them? Who's responsible for which aspect of the sterilization process? Most clinics, they soak them, they scrub the debris off, they put them in that locked container that snaps shut, it has the biohazard sticker on it, and then it's sent off to the sterilization site, and that's where the clinic's responsibility ends. Some go all the way through until it's packaged, and then it's sent out for sterilization. But you have to have those clear lines of responsibility and making sure that both parties, even if it's part of your organization, what is the clinic's responsibility, the staff at your clinic, what do we have to do to prep the instruments? And what is the sterilization site's responsibility for sterilizing them? And where does that line end? From the procedure all the way through until it's ready for use again. And making sure you have clear lines of responsibility discussed. So who's responsible for prepping, for cleaning, for sterilizing, for packaging, all of those things. And then on-site, off-site, and making sure that if the clinic is responsible for just that soaking and debris removal, what elements do you have to have on hand to transport appropriately so we're not having any cross-contamination as things move through your space. It should be a hard-sided container that is snapped shut. And then, of course, because it has instruments that have elements of body fluids or whatever on it, it needs to have the biohazard sticker on it for the transport to the sterilization site. And then what chemicals are being used at the clinic for that pre-soak or the cleansing, making sure that you're appropriately storing that at your facility because it's usually a very high level chemical and it's a safety concern for patients. So I have seen it quite often in the procedure room. Stored in a cabinet, and then there's the tub on the counter, and patients are coming in for procedures while they're sitting there soaking. That would not be considered secured. The chemical's not secure. The instruments that could be considered sharps, the biohazardous materials in that element, they're not secured from that patient safety perspective. So really thinking through what responsibilities do we have at the clinic? What is our process? And are we considering all aspects of patient safety regarding where we're storing these chemicals and processes? And then once that process is complete, that instrument is now sterile at your offsite location, how do you bring those instruments back? Who's responsible for ensuring it reached sterilization?
Do your staff who are bringing those instruments back and putting them into your storage areas know how to determine if the package is still intact? Was it damaged during transport? Is it still considered sterile, or is there a timestamp attached to it when they have to send them back for re-sterilization? Is it event related, meaning good until opened? Or is it maybe a 6-month or a 9-month or a 1-year sterilization date? What is that responsibility, and who is reviewing those instruments you're bringing back into your clinic to confirm that what you're storing within the 4 walls of your certified facility meets compliance standards? So as you're bringing instruments back into the clinic, checking to be sure that the packaging system is appropriate, that it's not damaged, that it has the indicator that shows that that instrument has been sterilized, whether it's built into the packaging system or you have the separate strips, whatever your process is. And then knowledge of, is it event related, or is there a date attached to this instrument of when I have to re-sterilize it, it hasn't been used yet. So making sure that staff understanding is in place. And the best way for us to know that staff understanding is in place is we observe, when we're on site to do a mock survey, we observe the staff that are processing instruments to prep them, to autoclave them if it's on site, and when they bring them back, how do they look at the packaging systems before putting them into use at the clinic? Yes.
So, a couple questions here.
Sure.
Number one, we clean our instruments and then we soak them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we dry them, leave them out to dry, and then we package them with like a paper towel and then stick them in a biohazard like Ziploc.
Okay, but it has a symbol on it.
But it has the biohazard
Okay.
symbol on it. And then we take them across the street and then they sterilize them in their autoclave. And they're put in the bags where it turns blue if it's, you know.
It has the built-in indicator.
Yes.
Okay.
So is that good until that seal is broke? That's my question. Like, do we have like 2 years, 1 year? I mean,
So that is all manufacturer driven. You have to look at the packaging system specific to the manufacturer you're using. And it will tell you what the timeline is, or if it's event related. If the term event related is on that packaging instructions from the manufacturer, that means that it's good until it's opened or damaged.
see, I don't see any instructions on there. There's nothing on the package at all except for.
It wouldn't be on the package, it'd be on the box that the packages come from. So most clinics use McKesson is a very common one that we see for supplies on autoclave packages. But it would just be, sorry. You would need to look at the manufacturer's guidance, and it's not going to be on the package, it will be on the box that the packages come in.
They don't really come in a package. So like, let's say we send 3 over.
Mm-hmm.
And they come back just in these clear wrappers that you open. The sterilizing.
Right.
package. There's nothing else. But
So you don't have the box on site, it's where you send them for sterilization. So then where that comes in is working with who's sterilizing your instruments and knowing what their process is. And then if they have a timestamp, they should be writing it on the packages. If they're not writing a timestamp on the package, then that it usually indicates that it's event related, but you'll want to confirm that with the site that's sterilizing for you. But I would come back to your process about putting them in plastic baggies.
I wrote that.
Yeah, I would make sure that it's in a hard-sided case, because that's a more of an OSHA concern, that what happens if that instrument is dropped on a foot, you want to make sure that anything that is biohazardous is in a secured environment. Did that answer your question, Ruann? Did that answer your question? Okay. So looking at your packaging, making sure that staff who are bringing them back in understand what the packaging system is, if there's a timeline attached to it, and that's just having a good conversation with your sterilization site. Indicators are commonly built in to the packaging systems that are there. Some manufacturers don't have that capability, so they have additional strips that you have to put in the system, and that's what you would look at to confirm it reached sterilization. Usually they're blue and turn brown or opposite. And then again, timeline if it's relevant, and that's all based on manufacturer's guidance. And then instruments in open position. So there are hinged instruments. Scissors commonly are hinged. If they are in the shut position, meaning they are hinged shut, and they come back to you in the package that way, they were not sterilized appropriately.
Any instrument that has a hinge has to be hinged open. I see tabs often on the bottoms of instruments to be sure they are kept in the open position, to be sure everything that's on that instrument is being sterilized, that there's no surface that didn't get touched through that steam process. And then coming back to that appropriate storage in your clinic. My first question, if I'm sending them out, is I'd be calling that site that's sterilizing them for me and asking, what system do you use? What is that packaging system? Is it McKesson or is there a different one that you're using? And then look up the manufacturer's guidance because you're the one that's storing it. You're the one that when the surveyor comes through and looks at your packages for instruments, if it's not appropriately stored, you're going to be the one that gets the deficiency, not your sterilization site. Yes.
Do you need to have proof of that? You know, like we've done that in the past with how to store, say, children's liquid Tylenol. We print the manufacturer recommendation for a case like that. Should we have that run out?
I am all for over documentation, but I know we get paper heavy and we get overloaded with paperwork very often, especially when it comes to policies, yay. But it can be helpful where you're storing your instruments to put the expectations on that insert of the cabinet or something along those lines. But thinking about instruments, there are some instruments that are considered sharp that would puncture skin. So when you're looking at your clinical physical plant, anywhere patients could be unattended, procedure rooms, exam rooms, those types of spaces where they could be left alone to change, make sure that your sharps are secured, and that even includes some instruments, okay? And then the autoclave. Now, I'm just gonna ask the room and those online, if you want to put it in the chat, how many still have an autoclave on site? Okay, so it is relevant and it's very common and it can be successful. I don't want to scare you, okay? It can be very successful for clinics. My guidance is that you read that manufacturer's guidance front to back to front, front to back to front to back 50 times and understand it fully, because that is what the surveyor is going to look at when they measure you at survey. They're going to pull that manufacturer's guidance. They're going to observe the person who's doing the instrument processing and make sure they follow it to a T and they have documentation to prove that they're doing that on a consistent basis. Commonly, the things that we find missing, and my colleague Michelle is here with me today, and she does quite a few walkthroughs as well. But when we do an initial mock for a clinic, the things that we find when they have an autoclave is missing documentation. They're not doing the spore checks according to manufacturer's timelines required. They don't have a batch log to show what instruments were processed when and what packaging system that's going to be related to. Because if that spore check comes back inaccurate, you should be able to pull the supplies that were run through that and be able to reprocess them. And how do you do that if you don't have documentation? So making sure you have your batch log, you know what contents were sterilized and when, you know the spore checks are being done according to manufacturer's timeline requirements. And then the other piece we find missing is documentation, proving that you're cleaning the autoclave machine according to the timeline and manufacturer's guidance. Usually there's a monthly, weekly, daily, there's specific elements that you have to show you're doing within the autoclave, not just from the instrument process, but on the equipment itself. So making sure you have documentation of when you're changing chemicals, that you're not having it store or the instruments are not setting in that chemical longer than the 28 or 30 days allowed. You have date times of when that's being processed and changed. Again, it's all deferring to manufacturers. So Michelle and I have the easy job of just looking at manufacturer's guidance. You have the process. The weight is on the clinic to confirm they're following that. And they have documentation to prove they're following the manufacturer's guidance. We just get to say, here's manufacturer, here's what we're going to look at to be sure you're in good process. Of course, we'll coach as we go through that because we want to make sure you're successful as well. But your guide, your book that you have to read diligently and make sure you have documentation to prove you're hitting every single target is your manufacturer's guidance. And then, yes.
When you say batch log, are you saying like the dates like we have a book, we write the dates that we ran it, and then we keep track of our controls, or are you talking we need to be documenting everything that's in that batch?
Here's the batch, here's what instruments are included in that batch. It should be a full comprehensive list. Okay. And then coming back to that packaging system, if you're sterilizing on site, you would have the boxes of the packaging on site, making sure you're adhering to that packaging system. Is it event related? Do we need to put a timestamp on this package when we're completing? Making sure we're not bleeding through the packaging system if we are writing the date on there. And just following the appropriate protocols for both the autoclave machine, processing of instruments, and those packaging systems. Those are the things that we have to have documented proof of. Here's an example of a very common autoclave manufacturer's guidance. This is the synopsis version. Usually the guidance is probably a good manual size long, but this is just an example of what you would want to look at. And you can see it has weekly, so I should be able to see documentation. You're hitting what that weekly requirement is. They have monthly tasks, and again, I should see that monthly log that this is being kept and measured. And then your process to the right is how to actually run the autoclave machine. And so your staff, my recommendation would be to turn this into a competency tool, turn it into a checklist, and whoever's processing your instruments, go through an initial each item that they're, just like you would with lab competency, go through an initial item that they understand and are able to carry out that task. And keep that documentation as proof that you're training your staff and there's knowledge about that process. Any questions online at this point? Okay. Now, this is a lovely excerpt. I'm not going to read the full thing to you. I do want to make sure that qualification testing, there's all these terms in the RHC world. We say one thing and it can mean 15 different things, like program eval, advisory committee, advisory evaluation. There's so many terms that are synonymous with each other. And so when we talk about spore tests, that's the same thing as a biological indicator, and it's the same thing as qualification testing. So when we're looking at our guidance, our manufacturer's guidance, make sure that we have clarification of what terms we're needing to understand as we go through the process to confirm sterilization is met every single time. So this is directly from that manufacturer's guidance that we showed on the previous page. This is an excerpt about how each cycle should be qualified, how you run those spore tests, and making sure you have documentation that you're following that requirement. Here's an example of a batch log. And so this was pulled, and it's just a way, a lot of clinics ask me for this. And so it's just an example of a batch log. I know that you can get them from your suppliers where you get your packaging systems. They usually have one available for purchase as well, but this is just an example of how to keep track of all of the elements you have to at your clinic. I will say this does not reflect the cleaning of your instruments, or sorry, the cleaning of the equipment. You'll want to keep that documentation as well. Now, I brought this up because, again, this is a common one we see when we do a walkthrough of a clinic, is these self-sealing pouches. This is probably what you get back when you get your instruments back. And so this has internal and external indicators. So that tells me I'm going to have a visual to know that this has reached sterilization. But then there is a time-related stamp on the bottom. Regarding 6 months, I would have to re-sterilize these instruments again. But there's nothing on the pouch itself that tells me 6 months is the timeline for that sterilization. The only way I know that is by looking at the manufacturer's guidance. And so that's where that conversation with your whoever is doing your sterilization, that they do that deep dig and they know how long that instrument is good for once they complete that sterilization process. And each packaging system is going to be different. And so I can't do a universal speech on that because every clinic is going to have a different supply. So it's really going back and looking at the indications and what tells us it's sterile. Are there additional elements we have to purchase to go alongside the systems? And is there a timestamp related to that? Now, I have this listed here because CDC is really the driving force behind infection control practices. I know we had a lot of guidance from them during COVID about how to keep our location clean. But they also have it broken down in instrument processing as well, and it's a lovely read. So this is in direct line of recommendations for cleaning of patient care devices. And I'm just gonna leave this here. I'm not gonna read it to you. I don't think you want to waste your time doing that. But it essentially is giving you that base foundation of what's the expectation. When a surveyor comes into your space, this is what they are going to be monitoring, observing to be sure we're hitting all of these targets. Are we keeping our, and it comes back to that really small statement in 491.6, a clean and orderly environment. All infection control is wrapped up into that simple statement. But there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of space within that for misinterpretation and for misprocessing. So making sure you have directly go back to CDC and say, here's the expectation to know that the instruments we're using with our patients is safe. And Aaliyah, sorry, is there another speaker after, or am I at the end? There is? Are they already here? Okay, good. Because I'm probably not going to go right up to 3 o'clock. All right. And then indications for sterilization. And this is where it comes down to knowing the chemicals you're using. So an example of this is I was at a clinic in Texas and they were doing the cold sterilization process. They had their chemical, they had their ventilation, they had their PPE. But when we dug into the detail of the chemical they thought was working for cold sterilization, the term was disinfectant, not sterilant. And it would have been a huge issue. I mean, the patients that would have been affected by that, could have potentially been affected by that, is why it becomes an immediate jeopardy type situation. And so having that conversation, knowing that we understand exactly what that chemical is intended for, if it needs heat to be activated, that would require sterilization through an autoclave system. So really being sure that when we pre-soak, that when we sterilize, we know exactly what we're using and what's required to hit sterilization, not just high-level disinfection. Okay. And then selection and use of lower level disinfectants. So this is where you really have to dive into what instruments are we using at our clinic, what makes sense for us to just have as disposable. If we have to have instruments that need to be re-sterilized, what is our process? Who's responsible for each phase of that process? And do we know without a doubt when a provider pulls an instrument, it's ready for the next patient? That it is sterile and we're not going to be giving any cross-contamination, we're not spreading anything. We know that it is sterile and ready for that use. Providers appreciate this too. They want to know because that's their liability, really. We want to make sure that we are protecting our patients, we are protecting our providers, and we're protecting our practices. And that is only accomplished by feeling confident that our sterilization processes are reaching full sterilization. Now, I am one to give a little bit here and there, but here is an example of some sample policy language. So I put in all 3 examples. So you have the disposable, you have the autoclave, and it again just differs directly to the manufacturer's guidance. And it has the send out language, what's at the clinic level, what's going to be handled at the sterilization site, and the relationship between that. So this is very basic. You can expand it to fit your structure. I tend to write policy in a way that doesn't put me in a box, because if we can't show we're following policy, that's where another deficiency can come into play. So that's why I like to defer to the manufacturer. But if you are one that likes to set out protocols of here's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, from here's the instrument being dirty until I know it's sterile. If you want to set out those protocols, I would attach that to the policy, but I would be careful about putting yourself in a box and written policy. But I'm all for setting a foundation, making sure there's consistency and streamlining the expectation across staff that are handling this process for you.
Now, here's some cautions. We already talked about the difference between a disinfectant and a sterilization process, making sure that we understand what that chemical can do and how it accomplishes its goal. And then the other thing I would look at is, where are you handling these really high level chemicals? Is it in a little tiny closet with the door closed, locked, and there's no ventilation in that space at all? I would be really careful of that, because it can be an OSHA exposure. And you might have, so I would be very cautious about where you're storing your chemicals, where it's in the tub and instruments are soaking. Be sure it's in a well ventilated area and you're hitting the target of what the manufacturer requires for ventilation. It's more so a caution if you're doing the cold sterilization. That's again, do not do that. But look at, if you're soaking in your clinic, make sure that you are aware of the expectation for ventilation for your staff and you're able to show you're meeting that requirement. And then PPE. It's not as much, I do find majority of the time we find gloves and all of that, the PPE supplies needed. But especially if you're doing cryotherapy, that switch of nitros from the big tank into the little unit you're taking in for patient use, make sure you have those insulated gloves and goggles and all of those things that you need to ensure your staff are safe as well. That's not necessarily instrument related. It just popped up because, oh boy, we see that often missing. Yes.
I just have one other question on the sterilization instruments. So don't they have to come back as well with the safety protectors on the ends of, like, the scissors, the little?
That's usually, those are usually used to show that it was sterilized in the open position. And then if you're seeing it puncture your packaging, then that's also a reason that it's being used, to avoid it damaging the packaging. Because if that package is damaged in any way, opened in any way, punctured by the scissor sharp end, then you would have to go through the reprocess of sterilization again. So it's not necessarily you have to. Most clinics choose to because it helps them not have to go through that whole rigmarole all over again. Any other questions? Excuse me. All right, so here's our recommendations. Develop your workflows and protocols and confirm that you meet sterilization regardless of what process you choose, whether it's the disposable only, sending out, or if you sterilize on site. Make sure you are able to show all of the workflows are established, staff have full understanding, you have documentation of their understanding and training, and that it's well understood and documented. We're just gonna leave it at that. And then training of designated staff on those requirements, document competency on established processes. There's my picture. I'm wearing the same shirt today. There you go. It's a good day. Any questions in regards to instrument processing? All right, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, as usual, thank you, Tressa, for such great information. We really do appreciate it. Next, we do have a couple of presentations, and this is from two of our board members here at the Rural Health Network. And first we have Laura Green, and she is from Aspire. And then secondly, we will have Sandy Witt, and she is from ProMedica, but it's not really the clinic name, and it's Health Specialist Lenawee. I always say that incorrectly. So please welcome them, and we're excited to hear about social determinants of health. We're just resetting up the presentation, so it'll be just one moment.
Alrighty. Hi, guys. I'm Laura Green. I am the Director of Population Health at Aspire Rural Health Systems. Just a little bit about me. I oversee three different departments at 3 locations. So I oversee social work, discharge planning, care coordination, and also the clinic quality. Bear with me, I'm on 2 different computers at the moment. I was also born and raised in Bad Axe, Michigan, which is in the thumb of Michigan. I now currently live a whole 45 minutes away in another county with my husband, my 2 little kids, and my 2 dogs. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of the social determinants of health. I do have Sandy, my other board member, who will be hopping on later, so we just didn't want to go over the same material. So what are social determinants of health? And I know we've kind of been hearing about this a lot lately. They're conditions and environments that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. Distribution of social determinants of health is often shared by public policies where the individual or group resides. As you can see here, there are 5 specific domains that represent social determinants of health. They include education, job opportunities and income, safe housing, transportation, neighborhoods, racism, discrimination, violence, access to nutritional goods and physical activity opportunities, polluted air and water, language, and literacy skills. So why do we screen for social determinants of health? As you can see on my slide, we want to enhance health equity, improve conditions in people's environments, increase quality of life and outcomes and risks. And I really like this quote for Healthy People 2030, create social, physical, and economic environments that promote attaining the full potential for health and well-being for all. So who is Aspire Rural Health System? We're a recent merger between 3 critical access hospitals up in the thumb of Michigan. That includes Hilton Dales, Marlette, and Deckerville. We are composed of 13 rural health clinics with their merger. So we go from Tuscola County, Huron County, Stanislaus County, and Lapeer. We do have a couple traditional fee-for-service clinics, and we also have a plethora of specialty clinics. Alrighty. So our EMR Epic is supported through our affiliate organization, Covenant Healthcare, based out of Saginaw. We either send out the screening for the social determinants of health prior to the visit. We typically like to do these at our annual well visit. And once the patient comes in for their visit, the medical assistant is the one that typically enters the information into the flow sheet. We are currently screening for all ages. And as you can see on my slide, those are how it's broken up for the questions for the social determinants of health. This is just an example of the flow sheet or the questionnaire that we would send to patients, either to have them fill out at home or fill out in the office. This side here is how it looks in our EMR Epic. And then the second picture there is how it shows to anybody that opens the patient's chart of any high risk screenings that show positive. Alrighty, and then these next couple of slides are just, oh, my slides are a little bit, oh, I might have sent her a different one, hold on. Alrighty, so this slide here is the CMS is recommended, sorry, by CMS for the Z codes that need to be dropped.
And typically our providers drop those.
Or do you feel you have better outcomes with sending those out prior to coming in?
Depending on when we send them out and if patients remember to bring them in. I would assume they're a little bit more honest at home than they are necessarily in the office, or if the medical assistant is reviewing the questions with them at the time of the visit, if that makes sense. So if we have a positive screening, the provider addresses it when they come in for their visit. And we make sure that we discuss with the patient if they're interested in receiving help. Just because a patient screens positive for needing assistance does not mean that they always want help. From there, if the patient agrees that they would like to have help, a referral is placed by the provider into our EMR and it goes to our care coordinators. We have 5 care coordinators that are registered nurses, and they will document in the patient's chart and also route a message to the provider about the different types of resources that they help the patient with. Our care coordinators have also created a community resource list that the offices may hand out to the patient at the time of the visit. Just in case there's anything they may want to start calling on for themselves, we do try to promote patients, empowering them to do things for themselves. Also, when the order is placed with a care coordinator, it goes into a work queue that they're able to work. Alrighty. So how did we get started screening for social determinants of health? Back in 2022, our patient-centered medical home physician organization offered an incentive for us to start screening for those. They were specific to Blue Cross Blue Shield patients. However, the clinic that I'm going to talk about their success stories took it a step further and decided that they were going to screen everyone in the clinic. You'll see on this next slide why. And the clinic that I'm specifically going to reference is Cassidy Family Practice. I spoke to the nurse practitioner who is in the clinic, and she's very passionate about doing these screenings. So it was nice to hear some of these success stories. So in this particular practice, they are rural health. They have 3 full-time providers, 1 physician, and 2 APPs. They have 2 nurse practitioners. So the data that we pulled, you'll see on my very last slide about what screens were positive. But in 2023, they saw roughly, they had 1,200 patients attributed to the practice, and that included about 8,500 office visits for the year. So the one gal that they screened, she was a 73-year-old female, and she actually had quite she had food insecurity was her big one. She did not qualify for assistance, so she couldn't go to NDHSS and get any type of assistance with that. And what we did was put in a referral to the care coordinators, and then they were able to get her hooked up with food bags. So what's unique about this is that if they hadn't done the screening, they would have never known that this patient had a need. She never would have discussed it with her providers. She would not have thought that the providers would be able to, in a clinic, be able to assist her with this. And to this day, this patient still comes in and is so incredibly thankful, and she does not screen positive for anything else in relation to social determinants of health. So the next success story is a 52-year-old woman who identified was living in a tent. Again, unfortunately not an uncommon situation upward from, but again, a situation that if they had not screened her using the social determinants of health questionnaire, I don't think it would have been identified that she was homeless. We have a local organization up by us in the Thumb, Michigan called the Human Development Commission. They do assist with helping individuals find housing. And with this patient, we were able to place her in an apartment. All right. So staff pushback. Initially, they were concerned about how lengthy the questionnaires were. And as you can see in my previous slides, it's very detailed. It does take time to enter that information into the flow sheet. Not only is it entered into the flow sheet, we then also put it into the note because we know if we get audited, they can look in the chart. they look in the know. So, that was one of the hiccups we kind of had, and it just takes longer overall to bring the patient, especially if you're doing it at the well visit, you know how long those can take. But now I can tell you that there isn't any staff pushback. They've really seen the positive effects of screening for the SCOHs. So that's been really interesting to see, and that it does work. You just got to get used to doing it in your workflow. Patient pushback, I think this is a commonality across rural health. Some of the patients feel that the government wants to know quite a bit of information about them, which is interesting because they all know where we live and our driver's license and our social security number. So besides that, also the office is very transparent with their patients. Patients do have the right to decline filling out the forms. And they try not to be pushy with them. Like if there is a need, they're not quick to say, do you need help? Do you want help? They let the patient kind of take control of that visit. If there is a need, please reach out to us. We are a resource to help. Here's the phone number to the care manager if you do decide that you would like some help. And they just know that they're there to advocate for them and to be a resource. So in 2023, oops, sorry, let me switch the slide here. We saw that the biggest strains, which I thought were pretty interesting because I thought they were going to be different, were financial strain, stress, and anxiety. So I thought for sure it was going to be transportation, and probably paying for food. But as you can see here, those were their top indicators that patients screen positive for. So interesting enough, the most recent data I was able to gather from 2021, specifically in relation to Tuscola County, is that at that time, 13% of the individuals living in Tuscola County were below the poverty line. 41% of the households fell below the ALS threshold. Do we know what the ALS threshold is? So that's where you were living just barely above the poverty line, but you're still not able to afford everything. And then within that, in 2021, 12% had severe housing problems of the residents within Tuscola County, and 50% of the households in Tuscola County were having housing costs that exceeded 30% of the income. So I know it's not a direct correlation from 2021 to 2023, but looking at what the problems were back in 2021 really kind of correlates with what's presented on this slide. And then this is just my citations that I wanted to share with you guys that I used in the presentation. Are there any questions?
What form do you guys use?
It's the one that's, no, I could look back and tell you, but it's whatever was built within our EMR.
So it's out of the EMR itself? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
It's not called for PAR, is it?
No, that does not sound familiar.
Pre-PAR.
Is it pre-PAR? Yeah, I know we've talked about what it is before and I've asked the question, but off the top of my head, no, I don't know.
Is it, so if they click that something is relevant to them, does that then expand into more questions, or do they have to fill in all questions every time?
It's all present there. So I think if they start with a no, then they know to answer the rest in the column for the different domains, no. But yes, once they hit yes, then they continue to fill it out. The spreadsheet or the questionnaires that we send out to patients has it all.
The reason I asked that is I had a clinic that they were struggling with patients wanting to participate in their social screening. And so what they ended up doing is restructuring their form to just determine if the full screen was necessary, doing like a pre-screening.
Yeah.
And it helped them to kind of streamline what patients were actually having to answer. And it helped bring in more engagement from the patients as well. So I didn't know if that was something, how your system was set up, if it was click this and then it expands, or if it's all just present and they have to fill it in.
It's all just present from what I'm trying to gather from the last time I looked at it. And we don't really have control over that because we have an affiliate organization that owns our EMR that's supported. So
Does it also help you meet some of your quality metrics if you're doing those social determinant of health screenings?
Yeah, there was a couple of things that changed with our Medicare well visit, and one of them when we had incorporated alcohol misuse, that's right in our SCOH. So it was We had a few clinics, again, that were patients in our medical home that were doing the SDOH screening for the uplift. But then this year, we just decided if they're gonna start putting more of those flow sheet questionnaires in the SDOH, we may as well just run across the board and start doing it. So the rest of the clinics that we're working with are newly doing it, and I think it's a culture change, right? Getting used to that you gotta fill these out when you come in. The other clinics have been doing it for almost 2 years now, and the patients are just used to doing it. But again, they're not pushy with it. If you don't want to fill out the questionnaire, you don't have to fill out the questionnaire. If you identify that something's positive, but don't feel like there's a need for us to make a referral, that's okay too. Just let us know if we need help.
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna have Ms. Sandy come up next, and she's gonna give her presentation with ProMedica, and I'll let her explain a little bit more because her situation's new, but she has a good presentation.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, good job.
Or do you have?
No, I got it. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. First off, I would just like to say it has been a pleasure to serve on the board these last few months. I have learned a lot. So my name is Sandy Witt. I am currently the office manager of Health Specialists of Lenawee. And I have worked for ProMedica for 30 years. At the end of the month, I'll be ending my tenure there and starting with a new health system.
What?
Yes.
Say what?
And I live in Ohio, but work in Michigan. So when I came up to our North region about 10 years ago, I worked at a clinic called IMA that was not rural health, but I quickly got wrapped up into PCMH and learned quickly about uplifts and things like that, because Ohio is behind the time. I don't usually say that about my great state of OH, but anyway, when it comes to that, I feel like they're way behind. When I got to work at HSL, I had never heard of rural health clinics. So in the past year since I've been there, I have really dug in. I have enjoyed it, hoping I can take that knowledge to my next health system and maybe help to roll out some health clinics there. So I'm pretty excited. So this is a picture of my clinic for a few more days. We at ProMedica serve 27 counties in Northwest Ohio. So our corporation is based in Ohio, but we have Southeast Michigan. We are currently in Coldwater still at the time, and I know they have quite a few rural health clinics. We have 11 hospitals, numerous healthcare centers with extensive array of specialties. What makes it a challenge for myself and my ops director, who has previously was the office manager there, or the CEO, excuse me, and she has been a great support to get me through RHC, introduce me to these conferences and things, but between her and I, we're the only ones that know anything kind of in our health system about RHC. So it makes it a challenge with billing and all kinds of things. We are, even though we are part of a system, we are an independent RHC, and my particular clinic joined ProMedica in 2019. So our guidelines and our previous CEO, Randy Ostra, was very, very passionate about social determinants of health. Unfortunately, with workforce reduction, we've had to scale back how we manage. We had a big hub previously and could easily send referrals there, but due to some workforce reductions, we've kind of scaled back, but it's still definitely a priority with our health system. So what I have here are the capabilities I'm sure most of you are familiar with for Blue Cross and Blue Shield PCMH. It's 10.7 and 10.8. So this is one thing that really helped us meet these capabilities, is this process I'm going to explain to you. So, you know, we obviously have the responsibility to identify patients who are high risk of complications, decompensation. Obviously, we want to connect patients to community resources, and we need to track that for high-risk patients. The practices are obviously encouraged to create a process to ensure vital services are tracked appropriately. The purpose of tracking the referrals is to ensure that the high-risk patients receive all the services they need, and they will be particularly responsible for, and patients also, as Laura mentioned, you know, we kind of have to put some of the onus on them. We can, you know, lead them to where they need to go, but they need to make that connection. We can't, you know, force them. The process includes a mechanism to track patients who decline care and obtain information about the reasons care was not sought. So here is our screening process, kind of a high level for the social determinants of health. So when patients arrive in the practice, they are offered the opportunity to complete the social determinants of health screening. I was challenged this year to get our screening numbers up. That was not one area that my staff was really involved in or engaged in. So we worked hard this year and this past year to try and increase the screenings. We're still on the lower end. We've seen some increase. We started in one hallway. I feel like once you master it there, then we can move down and, you know, roll it out in a different hallway. So we started in our IM hallway, and they have really taken it on. They've been very engaged with the process. So what we did is we set a goal of how to screen, you know, when were we going to screen? So like Laura said, we picked the well exams, the Medicare annual wellness, you know, and so the social factor screening areas are financial resource strain, food insecurity, housing instability, and lack of transportation. So one of the ways that we can do this is sending the questionnaire to them prior in ProMedica MyChart. So it's available to the patients prior to the visit if they have not completed it in the last year. So screenings can also be assigned during check-in, and they will receive them right there in the office, and they can complete it on their phones. The screening tool is available to complete 7 days before a patient's scheduled appointment. And when completed, you'll see the responses are reviewed by the clinical staff and then recorded in the patient's medical record. Then the next step is the in-office check-in. So check-in will review the department appointment reports, which we call the DAR, for eligible patients. The report, this shows up in the first column and will tell us whether or not the SDOH questionnaire is needed or not. So then the stop sign, and I have that in the next slide, the stop sign indicates that the patient needs to complete the SDOH screening. The green check mark indicates the questionnaire is on file and was completed in the last 305 days. And if the patient needs to complete the screening, we provide scripting to aid the receptionist with the conversation, because as Laura brought up, sometimes the staff are very hesitant and don't know exactly what to say to them. So this is what it looks like. I know the picture's kind of small, I apologize. So I had to shrink everything down. So as you can see, we were started out really good in the morning, and then we kind of faded off as we got busier in the afternoon. So the yellow triangle indicates that the patient is under the age of 18. All right, then we also have the great workflow, and this has worked well in our IM hallway. It's called the tablet workflow. So when patients arrive at our registration, we have kind of a lobby. They do their initial check-in, and then they do the sign-in when they get to the correct waiting room in our clinic. So when they arrive at the IM window at registration, we provide them with a tablet. And this tablet is linked to our DAR, and the barcode is scanned. This allows the patient to complete the screening in complete confidence. And we've been successful with that. Again, as you can see, we start strong in the morning and kind of wear down in the afternoon. So then we have the EPIC SDOH best practice advisories, and these will alert our providers on areas of needing help. So the BPA purpose is to assist in capturing the required billing codes. So if we've done the screening, it's like, hey, we've done our part, now you need to do your part when you close the note, which is always a challenge to get them to do their part, right? So patients complete the SDOH screening via MyChart, e-check-in, or tablet. So if the screening is positive for one of the following social factors, then the BPA will trigger for the clinical staff rooming once the chart is open. So the financial resource strain, food insecurity, the clinical staff then will select the appropriate button to the add visit diagnosis. If they don't, then the BPA will kind of alert the physician again when they're in the note also. And then to complete the BPA, the clinical staff will select, I am aware, acknowledge the reason, and then accept. The Z code diagnosis will be added and displayed in the visit diagnosis screening section of the encounter. And there's a screenshot of that. Capturing those Z codes, as you know, are very important for many payers. So we have this awesome, if there's financial strain, we have this awesome center, and this one still does exist. It's called the Financial Opportunity Center. So this is an automated referral. So if the patients screen that they have some financial issues, this automatically triggers and goes into their work queue to alert them. So if the patient screens positive or have a housing instability on the SUH questionnaire, it goes right to them. That best practice advisory creates a task for the counseling center. The patient is contacted and followed up for identified resources and needs. And based on the patient response, the staff will identify individual needs, complete additional assessments, and make recommendations and apply the proper interventions. And that's our staff for that. So food insecurity, we have a couple of different resources for our patients. So when a patient screens positive for food insecurity on the SDOH screening, they complete 2 questions. Now, the medical assistants are supposed to assess at every visit, no matter if they were in just a couple of days ago, because situations change, as we all know. So the 2 questions at each visit is, and they are supposed to read these word for word. We worried whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more. Was that often, sometimes, or never true in the last 12 months? Then the second is the food that we bought just didn't last and we didn't have enough money to buy more. Was that often, sometimes, or never true in the last 12 months? Now, when I've roomed patients, when I was at our Hudson clinic, it was very sad. They're very rural. They aren't set up quite yet for an RHC, but the amount of people that needed the food resources was just alarming to me. So one way to combat that in our North region is we have a veggie mobile. So if a patient screens positive when for often true, sometimes true to either question, then obviously a confidential conversation takes place. We will give them coupons to go to the Veggie Mobile, and it has several different locations, so they won't have to travel far. It hits several different communities throughout Southeast Michigan, which is very nice. And it actually will allow employees to buy, like when I worked in the Morenci clinic, it would go to the senior center. That's one of the popular locations in Morenci for them to stop. You could buy a big package of strawberries that's now selling for, $5 in the store. It was like $1 or $2. I mean, and it's good produce. So we asked the patient if they would like a referral to the ProMedica Food Clinic. They'll be sent home with a food bag. The food bags are very, very near and dear to my heart. One of my previous care navigators and I fought very, very hard to get food bags up. We had one clinic in Michigan that was allowed to have them, and that was our DMO's clinic. And they didn't really share them very well. And it's like, Blissfield is not the only place where we have food insecurity in the Southeast Michigan. So it took us a long time, but Rosemary and I kept working with Frank Nagel, who is our director, and I have a picture of him in a minute and talk more about him. But we worked very, very hard to get these food bags to all the locations in Southeast Michigan, and we finally succeeded. So I brought one to show you what comes in it. So you get some soup. Oh, okay. So you get a can of soup. Then you have the rolled oats. Sorry. let's see, there's mandarin oranges. Then they also get some milk. Pasta. And then diced peaches, corn. And then good old staple of peanut butter and green beans. Another great staple of tuna, and then some diced tomatoes. So yeah, and then another, I'm sorry, 2 cans of tuna. So before we had these, Rosemary and I at my other clinic, we actually started buying canned goods because we were seeing so much food insecurity. We were just doing it ourselves because we felt so bad for these people. I have been told by patients that they have made this last for 2 weeks. Now that's sad. So we just tell them, come back, we will give you more, don't worry, you know. We hold in our office probably about 10 bags, and then all we have to do is let our food clinic know, and then they'll send them to us via courier. So it's a great process. Then on the campus of Charles and Virginia Hickman Hospital, we now have ProMedica farms. So we have these raised beds. I haven't actually got to do the tour of this, but I hear great things. I know Doris has toured it, but it is really neat, and they have somebody working out there. They have all kinds of volunteers. They have a special work program through with some of the developmental disability individuals, and they learn these trades during it. So it was started by a 2-year grant that was secured by Frank Nagel, who was the director of community impact in ProMedica, Michigan. He is very, very dedicated to helping every single individual he can. And he worked hard to get the grant through the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. And the food then helps to feed individuals with food insecurity. So then we talk about transportation. So we do have what we call like bus tokens, even though this isn't truly, I don't know, I guess it's a little bit of a van bus, but anyway. So if a patient screens positive for lack of transportation on the SUH screening, we will connect patients with appropriate community resources. So we will offer bus tokens. So if they're at our office and they need to see a specialist and they can't get there, we will offer bus tokens. If they can't get to Walmart, you know, this Lenawee transportation will take them where they need to go. The biggest thing that's helped with technology is offering those virtual visits for the patients as well. So we can send a link. They don't have to go through my chart. We can send a link right to their cell phone, and they can just click on that. Obviously, if they have it, but it's helped with some of them. And then they can just open it up and we complete the visit. It's helped with compliance. The other thing is scheduling visits around the public transportation schedule, because they only run like 8 to 4. So you got to make sure you're scheduling enough time. If you have a provider that tends to run behind, you want to make sure that you're scheduling them before, so we aren't having to try and take them home ourselves. So just something to be cognitive of. All right, and then we are lucky enough to have care navigation. I have been blessed with a few of the best navigators we have in our system in the practices I've managed. So what they are is, and I know Laura kind of talked about it some too, hers were called care coordinators. It's an RN with experience. So they coordinate care, they provide numerous amount of resources to the patient and of value. We are lucky enough to have them embedded in our practice. So for most of our clinics, at least in Southeast Michigan, and then they ensure patients have the necessary resources upon discharge. They help us to keep up with those patients that need that transitional care management appointment as well, and help to ensure that they are scheduled and they come to the appointments. Obviously not in 100%, but it does help keep our numbers up. And what I hear most from them is the biggest job they have is acting as a social worker. So it would be great if we could have one of those embedded too, but we'll take what we can get. They're actually provided to us by a grant type program, so they don't actually fall as one of my FTEs. So it's like this added benefit dropped from the health system, and it's a blessing in disguise. They build great relationships with patients, you know, and it's just really a neat thing to see the relationships, and they come just to talk to them. And, you know, it's those only elderly patients that rely most on those care navigators. And I think sometimes that's what's keeping some of those patients going.
Sandy, quick question.
Yeah.
With the care navigators, has ProMedica looked at, converting those to, community health workers? Because there is some reimbursement. I mean, obviously they would have to go through the certification, but oftentimes those roles are very similar.
Yeah. That I would have to run by Amanda Beck, who runs our quality department, but I know they are doing like the TCMs with the different payers, and we are submitting for those like through Priority and the Blue Cross and Blue Shield. They have went through that program and been trained, so they are collecting on that. But that's a good idea. I didn't think about that, and she may not know, not, you know, being in Michigan and based in Michigan.
So I actually looked into that, because we have care coordinators, and it doesn't allow them to bill any more than what we already bill.
As long as it's a different service, they can.
Well, I mean, we can bill for everything. They can bill using their codes already. And like, we have certain codes they can already bill.
The care managers?
Yeah, and our care coordinators.
Now, we only do it, I believe, for like the TCMs and those kinds of things that they went through the training. I know they have some, but to teach, it's kind of funny because to teach an RN sometimes to enter billing codes, you know, they're like, this isn't what I went to school for. Because some of ours are, you know, have been RNs for several years, and they're kind of like phasing out in a few years from retirement, but they are amazing resources and a great part of the team. And then I just wanted to show, we do have this big booklet. It's a step-by-step for Epic that we can provide for our providers and staff just on the SUH process itself. So, all right. I just put on here to remind everybody of our next meeting too. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
I have the next one.
If you want to carry it, Ruanne, I'll give it to you.
No, I'm good.
Well, thank you for those who were here in person with us, also for those that joined us virtually. Again, we appreciate your attendance, and a big thank you to each and every one of our speakers. We really do strive to bring relevant information to all of you. There is a QR code on the screen as well as a link in the chat. If you would please take the evaluation for us again. We really like to know that we're hitting the mark, and if we're not, what can we do better? I do apologize for the technical difficulties today. As I mentioned in the chat, we have gained a new piece of equipment that was $1,100 to try to make our, I know, $1,100 to try to make our audio better. Apparently we have a little bit more learning to do, so please forgive us for that, but if you could take the evaluation and give us some feedback, we would really appreciate it. And for those of who are joining us virtually and will be joining us tomorrow, we're excited about tomorrow. We have some absolutely fabulous content, and we look forward to it. Thank you again for joining.